You almost never see television shows that are directly tied to the U.S. government. But that was the case in the TV show The FBI, which was an ABC action series that aired from 1965 to 74. And it really was a mouthpiece and a PR machine for the real FBI. At this point, the nation was really suffering from a lot of turmoil, and so was the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Watergate, Vietnam, the Weather Underground, and the numerous assassinations that happened filled up the newspapers with plenty of disturbing things that were going on at this time. This series ended up portraying the G-men of the FBI as pristine problem solvers and investigators. The series was produced by Quinn Martin. This television giant had a complete hold on the market with series like The Fugitive, The Streets of San Francisco, Barnaby Jones. This was a force to be reckoned with in Hollywood. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., who is the former star of the cop drama 77 Sunset Strip, played the lead role. He was the straight-laced Inspector Louis Erskine. The show also starred Philip Abbott and William Reynolds, and there were a total of 241 episodes, each being 60 minutes in length. Most people that watched the show didn't realize the involvement that really happened between J. Edgar Hoover and the TV show. He had ultimate approval in most of the themes that ran on the show. And that's one of the reasons that you see the show end shortly after his death. And it's probably one of the things that makes it one of the more fascinating production stories in TV history. J. Edgar Hoover was more than an advisor on the show. He's basically described as being an unseen force that had a guiding hand in both the on-screen action and production process behind the show. What you have to realize is Hoover was not a fan of Hollywood, and this is really an understatement, but he did come to trust Warner Brothers after the studio made the flattering Jimmy Stewart film, The FBI Story. The real FBI had the ultimate power of script approval through the entire show's run. You never hear of this being done. Scripts were continually shuttled back and forth between Hollywood and Washington. Hollywood would ship them to Washington, and the FBI would edit them down and delete things and change things that they didn't want in there. Then it would go back to Hollywood for a rewrite, and the process would happen again until the final script was approved and everybody was satisfied. In the very early 70s, Mark Felt served as an associate director of the FBI, and during that time, he acted as an informant to the Washington Post, and more specifically to the journalists Woodward and Bernstein. This earned him the immortal nickname Deep Throat. Well, he also was an unpaid technical advisor to this television show. He even hung out on the set with the stars. And he loved the portrayal of Erskine in the show, and he felt like that he was a really cool character that was willing to take risk and go outside of the rule book to get the job done. To help foot the bill for the television show and its big budget, the producers ended up turning to Detroit, and more specifically, the Ford Motor Company. They needed their sponsorship to help fund the series. You'll notice that the series is filled with Ford vehicles. Zimbalist, notably, would drive home a new Mustang in the closing credits of each episode. The car was updated to the latest model each season. As in many shows, it's kind of funny that when you see traffic on the road, it's usually a Ford in this series. And this is the way it is on any of these series when they get sponsorship from a car company. That company has basic control of the highways. And there's some pretty neat things that happened in real life on this show. After the show would conclude, Zimbalist would appear for a public service announcement, and he would announce some of the FBI's most wanted criminals. This was kind of a precursor to America's Most Wanted. But on April 7th, 1968, probably the most famous of these appeared after that episode. And that was the days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. After the episode called The Predators, Zimbalist came on the screen and asked for everybody's help in catching the killer, James Earl Ray. Now, of course, Zimbalist wasn't the only star of the show. William Reynolds appeared in several seasons as Special Agent Tom Colby. He had previously worked in other television shows like The Twilight Zone. But in the mid-1960s, he really turned his back on Hollywood and just kind of backed away from the rat race there. What did he do? He went to work selling real estate. He made a guest appearance on the show in 1966, and this spurred his acting comeback. The American public were deeply divided into the pro-Nixon camps and the anti-Nixon camps, and this split was completely reflected in the show's fan base. Nixon's so-called silent majority adored the series and what it stood for, while others felt that it was a piece of sanitized propaganda for J. Edgar Hoover's often dubious agenda. Now, in 2009, the real FBI director, Robert Mueller, bestowed Zimbalist with a plaque of an honorary special agent. The Bureau went on to thank him for helping shape the image of its agents, and I really feel like it did. There's no doubt about it. This was a propaganda-filled series, and it was basically directed by J. Edgar Hoover. And the Bureau just wanted to thank him for shaping the image of their agents and actually assisting the FBI with his post-episode bulletins that he did each week. Some of the special guest stars that were on the show got paid pretty well for being there, especially those that are now household names, like Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall. They reportedly earned $5,000 for their guest spots in single episodes. Now, that may not sound like a whole lot of money in today's money, but if you put it in perspective, the most that the Brady kids ever made for an episode of the Brady Bunch was $1,100. So when you compare it to what was really going on as far as a base, they were making pretty good money on this show. Now, the Bureau didn't just have veto power on the scripts. They had final say in which actors got to act in the series. And this is all according to memos that were released under the Freedom of Information Act. And you come to find out through this that the actor Robert Blake and the actress Betty Davis were both blacklisted from appearing on the show. And this was all based on their political views, and the truth be known, it's because Hoover didn't care for the two. If he didn't like you, you weren't going to be on this show. They thoroughly checked each actor out and did background checks on them to guarantee that they had no criminals, subversives, or communists that were associated with the show. Every detail of the show was looked at by Clyde Tolson, who was second in command at the FBI, and is most well known because of his relationship with J. Edgar Hoover. They did everything together. The premiere episode of the first season was called The Monster, and that was about a handsome serial killer who strangled women with their own hair. Tolson was so shocked at this that he recommended that the show be canceled. And then he talked J. Edgar Hoover into attempting to cancel the show on several other occasions. But instead, what they ended up doing was just toning the violence down in the show to appease both Tolson and Hoover. Now, for the series, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. had a prop that was really important in his role as an FBI agent. He had an FBI identification card that had a recent photograph of him. It also had fingerprints from his Army service and an identification number that was only one digit less than a genuine number that the FBI would really have. No other TV show has portrayed the cool, professional operation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation quite so thoroughly as this series did. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.